Behold how good it is, and how pleasant when brethren dwell in unity.
This week marks our 22nd Torah portion in the annual reading cycle. The text covers Exodus 35:1 to the end of the book. The portion is almost a copy of what we have already read back in Exodus 25. Both sections expound on the minutia of the tabernacle structure and its furnishings. The main difference is that in Exodus 25, God gives the blueprint, the instructions for building the tabernacle. And in Exodus 35, the people begin to execute the construction of the tabernacle. However, before the people pull together and hold a collection for precious materials and commission able artisans, Moses reminds them of the commandment to observe a Sabbath rest. The chapter begins, Moses assembled the whole Israelite community and said to them, "These are the things that the Lord has commanded you to do. For 6 days work is to be done, but the seventh day shall be your holy day, a day of Sabbath rest to the Lord. Whoever does any work on it is to be put to death." It may strike the reader as a bit odd that Moses expounds on Shabbat right before he launches into a litany of work orders for the whole community. But knowing what Shabbat means to observant Jews today and throughout history, Moses' prelude is fitting. As they build their house of worship, he is establishing the moral code and divine calendar that will guide the upstart nation for the rest of history. In practical terms, the institution of Shabbat will far outlast the tent of meeting or the coming temples. As the early Zionist writer Vayak'hel famously said, "More than the Jews have kept the Sabbath has kept the Jews." The Sabbath was not introduced for the first time on Mount Sinai. The Sabbath marked the day of rest since the dawn of creation. Other ancient peoples had legends of their pantheon of gods creating the sun, stars, and moon, but only Yahweh's creation story ends with the sanctifying of the seventh day. The first time the word holy, kadosh, is used in Genesis is in reference not to a place or a person or a mountain, but to the Sabbath. God blessed the seventh day and made it holy. At Sinai, the Israelites are commanded to remember the Sabbath, indicating that Sabbath observance was already known as one of the primordial truths of their forefathers' religion. They were familiar with the concept even as slaves in Egypt. Before the command was etched on the stone tablets 6 weeks out of Egypt, they were instructed to gather a double portion of manna on Friday so as not to desecrate the seventh day. That is the Bible's nonchalant way of first introducing practical prohibitions to protect the day of rest. The Sabbath also fashioned Israel to be a more humane nation than their contemporaries. Their moral laws would continue to evolve in regards to humans' rights. But from the start, Sabbath extended to slaves, foreigners in their midst, and work animals. Sabbath had a way of foreshadowing the Jubilee that humanity reached towards. According to the rabbis, the seventh day provided a glimpse of the world to come, where we are all free from the struggle of life and free to worship on a higher order. As the Israelites grew as a nation, the Sabbath was one of the primary ways God set them apart from the surrounding peoples and forged a brotherly bond of difference. The prophet Ezekiel, in a word from the Lord, writes, "I gave them my Sabbaths to be a sign between me and them, that they might know that I am the Lord that sanctifies them." Ezekiel lived out the end of his prophetic career in exile, where keeping the Sabbath came at a price. When Nehemiah and Ezra returned to the covenanted land and rebuilt their holy city and house of worship, they understood that the Sabbath had to be reinforced. They were relentless protectors of the Sabbath laws. Nehemiah went so far as to close the city gates to prevent outside commerce. That meant every Sabbath, the city of God's people withdrew from the world. Today, with no standing temple in Jerusalem, the Sabbath table has taken on an even higher form of sanctity. The Sabbath candles, bread, wine, and ritual washing all represent the elements that were once part of the holy sanctuary. The Sabbath table has become a form of the temple altar. The rabbis say that the Sabbath is the temple in time rather than space. And therefore, every Jew on Sabbath is likened to a priest entering the Holy of Holies. One cannot speak of the meaning of the Sabbath and the Jewish experience without referencing the late Rabbi Abraham Heschel's book, The Sabbath. What C.S. Lewis's Mere Christianity is to our own faith, Heschel's The Sabbath is to Jewish people. Every line of that transformative book is worthy of quoting, and it would be an injustice to anyone watching this not to share a few of the many. So here goes. Heschel wrote, "The meaning of the Sabbath is to celebrate time rather than space. 6 days a week we live under the tyranny of things of space. On the Sabbath we try to become attuned to holiness and time. It is a day on which we are called upon to share in what is eternal in time, to turn from the results of creation to the mystery of creation, from the world of creation to the creation of the world." Heschel adds, 6 days a week we wrestle with the world, wringing profit from the earth. But on the Sabbath, we especially care for the seed of eternity planted in the soul. The world has our hands, but our soul belongs to someone else. And lastly, Rabbi Heschel writes, "He who wants to enter the holiness of the day must first lay down the profanity of clattering commerce, of being yoked to toil. He must go away from the screech of dissonant days, from the nervousness and fury of betrayal and embezzling his own life. He must say farewell to manual work and learn to understand that the world has already been created and will survive without the help of man." I cannot plus upon that. Shabbat Shalom.
Behold how good it is, and how pleasant when brethren dwell